All right, man, we are in week 2 of identity. I hope you're starting to see how these negative labels begin to shape our belief systems and begin to shape our habits. So the reality is that we are who we believe ourselves to be. Now, this is not some new age concept of believing you're a unicorn or a butterfly or something like that, and that's who you are. This is a ingrained belief that we have certain labels and we have certain words that we have identified with, and that those words have great meanings and great definitions to them. And once we begin to accept a negative label and attach ourselves to it, our behavior tends to follow suit. Our behavior rises to our identity. And that's why it's so important to begin to have a true concept and reality of who you are, your core identity as a person, as a disciple, as a person inside of recovery. The reality is that our identity is hidden. And life seems to be on a quest of discovery, of really, discovering who we really are and what we're really about and all of these different things. But it seems to be hidden from our eyes. And I found this to be true in my personal experience, that this recovery journey and this walk of discipleship is one of discovery. It's one of multiple light bulb moments. That is where the light gets turned on and I get revelation, I get more discovery, and I get more truth, and my behavior begins to modify accordingly. And so that being said, that our identity is the same way. It comes in a really light bulb moments of a progressive manner of more discovery of God and who He is, more discovery about this path of discipleship, and more a personal discovery about ourselves. And so as this process begins to unfold, we have to understand that who we are is coming to us in probably a more gradual manner. We want full discovery, right? We want full disclosure. We want to know everything about who we are right now at this moment. And the reality is that it comes kind of piece by piece, during this process. But rest assured that you are on the journey, and that you are on the journey to discovery if you're paying attention to different scenarios that are taking place in your life. You're paying attention to the Word. You're paying attention to your other brothers in the Word of God, and however God chooses to speak to you. If you're paying attention in a progressive manner, you are discovering more and more about who you are and what your identity is, okay? So sometimes it's hidden. Sometimes we have to go through this process. But the hard thing that we have is that it's hard for us to really say who we are without saying what we do, right? When we introduce ourselves or we answer this question about who we are, who are you, we immediately go into the things that we do, right? We go into the roles that we play, in this world. We could be a pastor, we could be a teacher, we could be whatever. And if somebody asked us, hey, tell us who you are in 2 minutes or less, and then we go into these different labels, these different roles, and the different things that we identify with, and we can't really define who we are apart from the roles that we play. It sounds something like this. My name is Tim, and I'm an addict. Or my name is Tim, and I'm married. So I describe my role as a husband. I'm a father, and I'm describing my role as a parent. And then I am an entrepreneur. I'm describing, once again, my role in my occupation and what I do. And so we immediately always go to roles and acts, behavior, or positions, or stuff like that. And it's really hard for us to really grasp our core identity because we immediately think of external things, right? We think of being a husband, we think of being a father, a plumber, electrician, a financial advisor, a mental health professional, or whatever it is, and we're just describing what we do. But the reality is that we are not our profession. We are not even the roles that we play out in society. If you are a pastor, your core identity of who you are is not a pastor. If you are a husband, then your core identity is not a husband. It is a role that you play, but it's not who you are. And so we get our who, like who we are, mixed up with our do, and that is the things that we do inside of this world. And we're going to go into this topic of why this could be detrimental to our identity. So in the last week, we shed, these negative labels that attach themselves to who we are as a person. Now we're going to begin to pick apart this idea of separating our core identity from what we do. And you're going to find out why it's really important to do so, because we get our who and our do mixed up. So I had a guest on my podcast in the past, and he tells this tragic story of losing his son. And it's a heart-wrenching story. It's painful. It's a terrible tragedy that has come upon him. And the role of fatherhood could escape you. That's why I'm talking to you about this today, because when we have our identity wrapped up in an occupation, when we have our identity wrapped up inside of a role that we play, it is very insecure and shaky ground. Because the reality is that those conditions can change. And if who we are is wrapped up in a role, and when roles shift and change, then there becomes this identity crisis that we don't really know who we are. And we seek down into the depths of despair because a piece of us is gone. And I understand. I thoroughly understand traumatic experiences and suffering loss. But when we attach our identity to that role, the loss becomes 10x. And what I mean by that is that, everybody in this world, there's no one who gets through unscathed. And that is, you're going to visit a funeral, or you're most likely going to lose your parents. And all of these different things are going to happen. And we know that we are going to experience pain and loss. So with that being said, should I 10x that pain with me being overly significantly attached to that role? Because the reality is when I think about my identity, I am not just a father. And my core identity of who I am should not be wrapped up in just being a father. And this is what happens with empty nesters, right? Their whole identity is focused on their core, being a father, being a parent. That is who they are. And they haven't really discovered who they really are as a person, and begin to have a holistic life and a holistic balance. And so their time is just spent on what they perceive to be their core identity, fatherhood. And then, of course, the kids move out and things change, their roles change, and all of a sudden, they don't know who they are anymore. They look at their spouse and their partner, and they're like, I don't even know you. Like, why are we together again? And so this is what I'm talking about, this extreme attachment to a role. Now, we can have this inside of marriages, and as we know, unfortunately, the statistic is really high about the divorce rate and what marriages actually survive. And I believe that's 60% of some people get divorced. And so when we attach our core identity, this is who I am. I am a husband. And we place all the significance and all that attachment to that one role. And all of a sudden, roles shift, things change, right? Maybe there's unfaithfulness in the marriage. Maybe there's situations that you just absolutely positively grew apart and they couldn't see eye to eye on hardly anything anymore. All of these different scenarios that come to play. that you find out that your marriage is ending. And the reality is that this is a condition that happens in the world, and it's most likely to happen to 60-70% of whoever couples, right? And so knowing that that could be a reality, now we don't want it, right? We don't plan for it, but knowing that could be a reality, should I attach my identity and who I am and everything in to the role of a husband? And this is where extreme depression and loss comes from. Like I said, that because we trust in that, and we put all our eggs in one basket, if you will, and our whole identity is that of a husband. When that thing goes south and falls apart, we don't know who we are. And because we place so much significance and our identity inside of a role. The next one, how about occupation? This was me during the financial crisis of mortgage crisis of 2008, 2009. I was in construction for the 2000s there during that decade. Built a lot of homes. I had a set plan, right? That I was in construction, and I was going to rise up the ranks and become an area manager, and that's where you are a supervisor over different superintendents. And I figured at this age right now that I was in, that I would be in that position, and I would be making 125 something like that, 1,000 a year, and I would do all these different things. But the reality is, and the lesson was, my whole identity. You asked me who I am, who was I? And I would point to my occupation. I would point to the work that I do, because I found a lot of significance, a lot of worth, a lot of value inside of my occupation, and I identified with that label of who I was. And the reality is that because it is shaky ground, because it is not a sure foundation, and it began to fall apart. And it fell apart to no actions or behavior of my own. It fell apart because we are inside of a falling world, and things are unpredictable. Things are shaky. Things change. Systems change. Money changes. Careers change. All of these different things. And so my identity was so wrapped up in my occupation that when I lost it, I was devastated, right? And, having the house that I wanted, and the truck that I wanted, and just the lifestyle that I enjoyed at the time, and all of these different things came to a crumbling and a falling down. And so what did I begin to do? I began to sedate. Why? Because my loss was 10x'd. That means I experienced the pain 10 times amount as a person would, who is solid and secure, because of my identity being wrapped up in my occupation. And of course, it became devastating. And then I begin to withdraw. Instead of going out there and going through, all my contacts and all my network. I had a big network, right? Instead of going through the list of all my network and all the people that I knew, I sunk down into a pit and into despair. And that happened because my identity was placed inside of my occupation. So the reality is that everything changes, right? You could end up losing your home. You could, end up having to sell your car. You might have a position that you currently have, and that could be almost like it's stripped away, or you could lose it, or it could be taken away from you due to unforeseen circumstances. Relationships could fall apart unattendedly and happen at no fault to your own. So all of these different things you could suffer the loss of, and you could go through a really, really painful process. And if your identity is attached to all of these things, you're going to suffer great loss, and you're going to go down to the pit of despair and funk and all of these things. You ask me how I know. I know I've been to almost every single one of these places where I begin to attach my identity and all these things. My identity was once attached to being a pastor, and running a ministry and being one of the most successful youth ministries in the city, and all of these different things, and suffering the loss of those things, and really, really going to the core of who I was. So there's this unhealthy attachment to these things. Now, here's the reality that a lot of these things can be positive. It can be positive things. There's nothing wrong with, having the house that I had, or the truck that I had, or the position that I had, the relationship that I had, the career that I had. There's nothing wrong with any of those things. Now, what is wrong is when that becomes my sole focus, and who I am as a person is attached to something external. That, I cannot cope, I cannot live, I cannot function normally without these different things. So what it comes down to is a trust in the externals. That is in appearances, in your pocketbook, and your position, and your power, and your house, and all of these different things. They all correlate to this one thing. I'm going to place my confidence, and I'm going to go all in, and I'm going to trust in these external things. And all of these things, of course, are shaky ground. The very core of addiction is really having your identity and who you are wrapped up, inside of a substance. And that you are going to have this unhealthy attachment to something, and that you are going to trust in that external thing, and that external thing happens to be a substance. So if we have this identity, and it's always wrapped up in other people, and then it's always wrapped up in position, it's always wrapped up in this, that, and the other thing, and it begins to fall apart, it's easy for our identity to be wrapped up inside of an addiction. One of the biggest things that we find ourselves wrapped up is things, right? Especially if you had some degree of success, inside of business, and you're making a decent wage, and you have all these plans, and this, that, and the other thing, that our very person can be wrapped up inside of our possessions and the things that we have. Another thing is status. Right? I know for me, it was a numbers thing, as a youth pastor, and being really successful, creating a great environment that really was welcoming to kids, and just creating all this stuff that just really worked, and having, a lot of numbers, that I began to have my identity not only wrapped up in my role as what I was doing, but I had it wrapped up in my success, in the numbers that I was drawing. And so this is a very dangerous place to be. And all of these things are attached to feeding your ego, right? All of these things go to some sort of significance of who you are, and kind of puffs you up and builds up your head, if you will, and causes you to inflate with ego and pride and all of these different things. And so for me personally, the loss of these things was a very spiritual and education moment about ego, and where I place my identity and my confidence in. So numbers was a big one for me. And it's a sad thing, because, a lot of ministers, they place their self-worth, and it's attached to those numbers. And so if the numbers are good, and you're reaching a lot of people, then you somehow feel worthy, and you somehow feel successful. And that's one of the most dangerous things that we could do, is attach our worth to things, to our possessions, attach our worth to our status within the community. And if we're keeping up with the Joneses, right? And we attach our worth in numbers, as leaders and as pastors, and how effective am I being, and how many people am I reaching. And all of a sudden we have our self-worth, our identity, attached to all these different things. And there's one thing that it's not attached to, and that is to the Spirit of God, right? And so these things begin to shake and they begin to fall apart. And it's probably most beneficial that they do, so we can really grasp and understand that our identity is not inside of these things. My identity and my self-worth was in the economic system. Man, the economic system was booming and we were making lots of money. And I was super busy, and at one time building models, 3 months straight, just going hard, working, and to the big grand opening celebration and having a party, and just all wrapped up in this money making machine and this economic boom that was going on. And it was like this balloon that was growing and growing and growing, and it had nothing it could do but burst. And it burst, and we experience the true pain of where our identity and where our self-worth was located. Politics. Now, I'm not going to dwell on this too much because this is not a political podcast, but we have our identity wrapped up inside of our politics. And we think of who we are when we slap that label, whatever it is, conservative, liberal, or whatever you want to call it. And we slap that label on us and we say, this is who we are. But we don't understand that that certain parties, that we have certain beliefs that we believe in, and we have certain beliefs that we don't. And to classify or stick the label on you like you agree with 100% with every single policy is just crazy, right? But yet we do this, and our identity gets wrapped up inside of our politicians. Our identity gets wrapped up inside of our success, right? We're successful, we're reaching people, we're doing all of these great things. And all of a sudden, that if we experience any failure, any opposition, that begins to challenge our identity and our self-worth. Grades. Man, if you went through college and your identity's wrapped up in your school, right? And whatever that identity is that they're pushing on you, and school pride and supporting it and all these different things, and getting good grades and having your identity. And then if you begin to slide or fail or falter in any sort of way, all of a sudden your self-worth is diminished and you don't feel the same. And the reality is, it's because your identity is wrapped up inside of those things. One of the biggest things is this, is the riches, is wealth, money, having our identity wrapped up in that. In religious circles, there is a strong emphasis on having your self-worth and your identity wrapped up inside of your works. And as we understand works, it means to, whatever the religiosity wants from you. Go to church, read, pray, give, support missions. Some, depending on if you're radical or not, fast. And then some might be some door-to-door evangelism or whatever. And so they have this list of works that are good works, that you can have your identity and your self-worth, who you are, wrapped up inside of those things. And that is, you got to make sure that you attend. If you don't attend, then that affects your self-worth, and all of a sudden your identity is challenged. And then you just go down the list. If you're not fasting, if you're not praying, if you're not meeting the standard of religiosity, then your self-worth and your identity is challenged. Now, this is a dangerous thing. And the reason why it's so dangerous is because it's masked as something good and beneficial. It's masked under the camouflage of godliness and spirituality, when in fact we can do all of those things for all the wrong reasons. And you can guarantee, if your self-worth is attached to those things and your identity is attached to those things, you can guarantee that that you are going to suffer a lot of pain. And not only that, that your acceptance and approval of God is going to come from if you maintain those standards or not. And so if you fall short in any area, of course, you feel that, God is going to judge you, and that he is going to come against you, and all of these different things. And so when we place our self-worth and our identity inside of our works, it's just as bad as placing our identity and our self-worth inside of riches and wealth and money. Moving on, your good looks, your talents, your skills, abilities, your health, right? It was a very sad story. This woman who was so healthy and just so self-consumed with herself and exercise and all of these different things. Like her whole life was her core identity was just built around her ability to do certain things. And it was so sad, of course, when she lost that ability to do those things and became sick, and it affected all of those different areas of life. The extreme pain and the extreme suffering that took place because her identity was wrapped up inside of those activities. Who she was attached to those things. So it's much like a football player, right? They go all in on football, and they go, and the discipline that is required, and showing up, and just really doing the exercise and going the extra mile. To be elite is to do all these things, right? And they have their whole identity and everything wrapped up in their physical ability and inside of their careers. And then they get a career-ending injury, right? And then what happens? Well, they join the recovery bandwagon. Many of them go into this deep funk and despair, into drug addiction, and just really go to the pits. And the reason why is because their core identity is wrapped up inside of their performance. And they experience the loss and the devastation in a 10x factor. So the Bible says this. I'll give you a couple of scriptures here. In Psalms 20, verse 7, it says, "Some trust in chariots and some trust in horses, but we will trust in the name of the Lord our God." And so what the psalmist is saying here is that we're not going to be the kind of people that place our confidence in our identity, who we are, in our self-worth, inside of chariots and inside of horses. As a nation, that would be like war machines. That would be like tanks, and or maybe for a personal person, it would be fancy cars. And so if this was a modern translation, according to what is going on inside of our society, it would say, you know what, I'm not going to trust in my my army tank, or I'm not going to trust inside of my fancy cars, or my big house, or my big stable with all of my beautiful strong horses and all these different things. Then I'm not going to place my identity inside of those things, but I'm going to place my self-worth, my identity inside of the Lord. Paul says this in Timothy. He said, command those who are rich in this present age not to be haughty, nor to trust in uncertain riches. And so once again, we have a powerful mentor, a powerful leader, communicating to his his mentee, if you will, that, hey, make sure that you tell the rich people not to place their confidence and trust in uncertain riches. And the reality is he was saying that because the tendency to place our identity and our self-worth in the monetary money that we got coming in. So if we have a certain amount and we're keeping up with the Joneses, we feel good. And if we don't have a certain amount, therefore we feel bad. And our identity, self-worth is attached to the monetary value that's coming in. And this is very, very devastating. In Isaiah 31:1, it says, woe to them that go down to Egypt for help. And this is a symbolic of placing your identity and your self-worth inside of the world and inside of the world systems. And if you haven't noticed, in the past years, even since I've been alive, I have thoroughly been educated and thoroughly discovered the world systems are on a very shaky ground. The food service industry, the trucking, the stock market, all of these different things could be collapsed in just a moment's time. And the reality is that the best thing that we can do is begin to get the mindset of how am I going to become fully self-sufficient, in the sense that I rely less and less and less upon the systems and upon the government. Because this is all something that's very, very shaky and that can fall apart, of course, at a moment's notice. And so am I going to place my confidence in my government to save me? Or am I going to begin to prepare financially? Here's the reality that we're, as a society, we're all preppers in some way. We all prep for emergencies. We prep for financial disasters. We prep for medical emergencies, and all of these different things that we prep for. But we don't take it the next step further and say, you know what? I'm going to look at my life and say, you know what? I'm going to try to become more self-sufficient in different areas of my life. So when something begins to happen, I don't have to look for the government to save me. And I thank God, during the Corona crisis, when we were shut down, I peacefully protest and continued working and continued going on and moving forward, and didn't, sit around and wait for some bailout money to come and rescue me. So woe to them who place their identity, their confidence, their self-worth inside of their government for help and protection. We should take on responsibility for ourselves. And the reality is that the self-protection of my home is my responsibility. And that it would be naive to think that the government would be responsible for the protection of my family. They might respond 10 minutes later after the damage is done, but the responsibility for the protection is my responsibility. So we could trust, we could place our confidence, we could place our self-worth in all of these different things. To go along with that, another psalmist said, don't put your trust in princes nor in the Son of Man. And that is putting your identity inside of your politicians. Because the reality is that they're just men and they just fail. And they're subject to frailty and shortcomings and all of these different things. Last one, Ezekiel 16:15 said, but you did trust in your own beauty and you played the harlot. And so he's talking there about placing your confidence inside of your physical ability and inside of your beauty. David, when he was king, he decided to number his troops and to begin to place confidence inside of his numbers, inside of his strengths, and begin to find his identity and his self-worth inside of that number. And then, of course, God came to him and began to rebuke him and said that he did an evil thing by numbering and wanting to place his identity and self-worth inside of that number. And this we thoroughly understand, that our worth and our identity should be on a stable ground. And that stable ground is God himself. That stable ground is the Spirit of God that is alive on the inside of us. So the main message today is this, is that we have all these different things that we can trust in. We have all of these different things that we can place our self-worth and our identity in, our confidence, and they're all fleeting, and they are all temporary. And the reality is they are all subject to change. And if we attach ourselves to those things in this extreme fashion, when they fade and when they disappear, we are going to experience a pain and a loss that is 10x times what it should be if we would place our confidence, our self-worth, and our identity inside of the Spirit of God.